There is a thing that happens when you listen to certain albums. You put them on, the music starts, and somewhere in the back of your head you know something the person making that music did not know yet. You know what comes next, and the record sounds different. Not better, not worse. Different in the way a photograph of someone laughing sounds different when you know what year it was taken. That is what this list is about. 10 times that happened in rock and roll, and it never gets easier. Number 10, Led Zeppelin, In Through the Outdoor, 1979. If you have listened to this album and always felt something slightly off about it, some quality that did not quite match what you expected from Zeppelin, you were not wrong. By the time they recorded this thing in Stockholm in late 1978, the band was already fracturing from the inside. Jimmy Page and John Bonham were barely showing up to sessions. Page was deep in heroin addiction. Bonham's drinking had reached a point where it was affecting everything. John Paul Jones later described it as two distinct camps in the studio, himself and Robert Plant on one side, considerably cleaner than the other two. You can hear all of that. The album sounds more like Jones and Plant than anything the four of them had done together. More keyboard-driven, more melancholy, more uncertain. And here is the part I did not know until I started digging into this one more carefully, and it has stayed with me ever since. After the album came out, Jimmy Page said he was already thinking about the next record. He and Bonham had discussed it. He wanted to get back to something raw and riff-heavy, a hard course correction from what In Through the Outdoor had become. He said in an interview years later that they had wanted to make something different after this one, and Bonham was right there with him. On September 25, 1980, 13 months after this album dropped, John Bonham consumed somewhere around 40 measures of vodka over the course of a day, fell asleep at Jimmy Page's house in Windsor, and did not wake up. He was 32. 3 months later, the remaining members of Led Zeppelin released a statement saying they could not continue without him, and the album Page and Bonham were planning, the one they were excited about, the course correction, disappeared with that statement. In Through the Outdoor is the last thing they completed together. The sound of a band still in the middle of figuring out what it wanted to be next. And I know you know that feeling, wanting to do something better on the next one, and knowing there was not a next one. Number 9, the Allman Brothers Band, Eat a Peach, 1972. This one is different from everything else on this list, because every other album here was finished before the loss. This one was interrupted by it. In the middle, mid-sentence, Eat a Peach. Allman Brothers Band, February, 1972. By the fall of 1971, these guys were finally arriving at the thing they had been building toward. At Fillmore East had just gone gold. Duane Allman was at the absolute peak of what he could do. They went into Criteria Studios in Miami in September 1971 to start what was supposed to be their third studio album. They cut 3 tracks: Blue Sky, a piece they were still calling The Road to Calico, and a short, gorgeous acoustic instrumental called Little Martha, the only Allman Brothers track ever written entirely by Duane alone, the most recent recording he made before he died. It sounds like someone trying to say something they cannot find the words for. If you have ever listened to it and wondered why it sounds like an ending, now you know. On October 29, 1971, Duane Allman was killed in a motorcycle accident in Macon, Georgia. He was 24. The sessions, half done, sat there. And here is the part I find almost impossible every time I go back to it. At the very end of the live recording of Mountain Jam that anchors this album, you can hear Duane call out his bandmates' names one by one. All of them. And then, "And I'm Dwayne Allman. Thank you." He was doing what you do at the end of a show. He could not have known those would be his last recorded words on an Allman Brothers record, that the title of the album they were building would come from an old interview quote of his. That his brother Greg would write the opening track, "Ain't Wastin' Time No More," because, in Greg's words, it was the only thing he knew how to do right then. That the album would be subtitled, "Dedicated to a Brother." So you are listening to a record that is, quite literally, half before and half after. And somewhere in the middle of it, the world shifted. The album holds both sides of that. It is the only one on this list that does. Let's look at the numbers. Only 9% of you are actually subscribed. Honestly, that's tough to see. Our team spends days hunting down archives and verifying every single fact just to tell these stories right. If you've made it this far into the video, you're clearly part of the community, so please hit subscribe. It costs nothing and helps us immensely. Now, for those already subscribed, very few of you have made the jump to our membership, and that's a hard pill to swallow because you're the ones who know our value best. If this channel has moved you or inspired you, consider joining. It's the price of one coffee, but it's the literal fuel for this channel. Let's keep this alive together. Back to the story. Number 8, The Doors, LA Woman, 1971. The circumstances around the making of it are so specific and so strange. LA Woman, The Doors, April 1971. By the time they made this record, the whole thing was already coming apart. Their original producer had walked out of the sessions. He said the material was too soft, insulted the band, and left. I see your hair is burning. And so the Doors moved into their own small rehearsal space on Santa Monica Boulevard and recorded the whole album themselves, practically live. Very few overdubs, no outside management, just the four of them. And an engineer named Bruce Botnick. And it sounds like that. It sounds raw and tired and alive, in the way that things are alive when they know the road is running out. By the fall of 1970, Jim Morrison had already had the worst live performance of his career, a chaotic, visibly deteriorating show in New Orleans in December that shocked people who had followed the band for years. He was drinking heavily. His voice was frayed. He wanted out of the rock star life. He had started talking about Paris, about writing poetry, about just being a person again for a while. Midnight alleys roam. LA Woman came out April 19th, 1971. And here is the part that still stops me cold. The last song the four original Doors ever recorded together was Riders on the Storm, that gentle, rain-soaked closing track, eerie and slow and drifting. Morrison left for Paris before the album was even mixed. Jim Morrison was found dead in a bathtub in his girlfriend's apartment in Paris on July 3, 1971. He was 27. No autopsy was ever performed. The official cause was listed as heart failure. If you know the date, you already know what I am going to tell you about the Riders on the Storm single. It made its debut on the Billboard Hot 100 that same day, July 3, 1971. The last song they ever made together charted on the day he died. He chose it as the closing track, and it closes like a door being shut very quietly, behind someone who has already left the room. Number 7, Metallica, Master of Puppets, 1986. This one is personal for me. I found Metallica when I was young enough that it hit me the way only music can hit you when you are young, physically. I remember the first time Battery came through and the acoustic intro ended and the thing just destroyed everything in its path. And Master of Puppets was the record that taught me heavy music could be architecturally complicated, that it could have more structure than most classical music, and more emotional weight than anything on the radio at the time. I still believe that. I will believe it until I am dead. Cliff Burton was the bassist, 24 years old, the most musical member of the band by his own bandmates' admission, the one who pushed them toward complexity and classical influence, and the kind of long-form instrumental writing you hear most clearly on a track called Orion. Kirk Hammett later said about that track, "For me, Orion was Cliff Burton's swan song." He is right. Master of Puppets came out March 3, 1986. Metallica spent the next several months on tour in support of it, first supporting Ozzy Osbourne in the US, then their own European run. On the night of September 27, 1986, while the band was traveling through Sweden between shows, the tour bus hit a patch of ice, slid off the road, and rolled. Cliff Burton was asleep in his bunk. He was thrown through a window and killed. He was 24 years old. Now look at the album artwork if you have not looked at it recently. Some of you just went still when I said that. That is the right reaction, because the artwork depicts a cemetery field of white crosses tethered to strings, being manipulated by hands reaching down from a blood-red sky. They designed that cover during the recording sessions. They had no idea what the tour would bring. But now you cannot look at those crosses and not hear the bus sliding on that Swedish road. The art did not mean what they thought it meant when they made it. It means something different now. Metallica later wrote a 20-minute piece on their next album as a direct tribute to Burton. They placed a Cliff Burton bass solo at its center. His parents were at the auditions for his replacement, and his mother embraced the new bassist after selecting him and said, "You are the one. Please be safe." She had already lost one. Number 6, AC/DC, Highway to Hell, 1979. You know this song, you know this album, and if you are watching this channel, you have probably known it for a long time. But here is the thing about Highway to Hell that I want you to sit with for a second. Because the song that became Bon Scott's sonic epitaph was never meant to be anyone's epitaph. It was a joke, a road joke. Angus Young described the grueling 1978 touring schedule as a highway to hell, and they wrote a song about it. That is it. That is the origin. A very tired rock band with a dark sense of humor, joking about life on the road. Highway to Hell was released July 27, 1979. A week after it dropped, AC/DC played Madison Square Garden for the first time, opening for Ted Nugent. Bon Scott reportedly went backstage that night and told a journalist the band was going to be one of the biggest in the world. Give it a year or two, and they would sell that place out on their own. He was correct. He just did not get to see it. The last Bon Scott show was January 27, 1980 at the Gaumont Theatre in Southampton, the last performance of the Highway to Hell tour. One month and 3 weeks later, on February 19, 1980, Scott was found dead in the back of a friend's car in London after a night of heavy drinking. He was 33. Official cause, acute alcohol poisoning. The title of the album, whose tour he was finishing when he died, had been a self-deprecating joke about what it felt like to be in a rock band. And here is the detail that will not leave me alone. The very last thing Bon Scott says on the entire album, the closing seconds of Night Prowler, the final track, is a Mork and Mindy impression. A gag. 2 throwaway words. He was being funny because he was always being funny. He did not know those were his last recorded words. He thought he had the next one to do. 5 months after Bon Scott's death, Back in Black came out. It was a tribute to him. It sold more than 50 million copies. He would have found that extraordinary. He would have found something funny to say about it. Number 5, Nirvana. In Utero, 1993. When Nirvana made In Utero, Kurt Cobain thought he was making a comeback. I mean that sincerely. He thought he was returning to something real and honest after what Nevermind had done to him. After 2 years of being the most famous rock musician in the world, and hating almost every second of it, he hired Steve Albini, who was famous for recording bands the way they actually sounded. He recorded the whole thing in 2 weeks at a studio in rural Minnesota. He wanted it raw and difficult and unceremonious. He wanted his label to be annoyed by it. He wanted to be less famous, not more. The album was originally going to be called I Hate Myself and Want to Die. His label convinced him to change it for legal reasons. The title In Utero came from a Courtney Love poem. And there is a line in the opening track where Cobain is openly mocking his own fame, mocking the whole thing, the way you do when you are exhausted by something you were not expecting and cannot figure out how to get out of. He thought of himself as someone trying to escape something. He did not think of himself as someone saying goodbye. In Utero came out September 21st, 1993. Kurt Cobain was found dead at his Seattle home on April 8, 1994. He was 27. And the thing about In Utero is that if you go back and listen to it now, really listen, not as background, it is almost impossible to hear it as anything other than a document of someone in the middle of coming apart. Corrosive and brilliant, and full of a very specific kind of rage that is directed mostly inward. The single from the end of the album was cancelled after he died. It was called Penny Royalty. They had pressed it, they pulled it. The last word on In Utero, the very last lyric before the album ends and goes silent, is the word R. Part of a longer line about everyone and everything. And then there is a silence that lasts longer than most silences on records. And then it is over. Number 4, The Who. Who Are You? 1978. He is sitting on a chair with the back of the chair facing the camera. The photographer positioned him that way because by 1978, Moon's body had been so physically ravaged by his drinking that his stomach had become visibly distended, and they wanted to hide it. He was 32. He looked much older. On the back of that chair, in capital letters, you will see 4 words, not to be taken away. You just read them. I know because I did the same thing the first time, and I had to put the album down for a minute. Keith Moon died 20 days after Who Are You came out. He was 32. Here is what you might not know. By the time they were recording this album, Pete Townsend had been seriously considering firing Moon from the band. His drumming was so unreliable that sessions had repeatedly come to a halt. Moon understood. He was described by his bandmates as disgusted with himself. Trying to pull back, trying to clean up, aware of the gap between what he had been and what he was now. This was, by any fair accounting, a diminished Keith Moon. And it was still Keith Moon. You can still hear it under everything, that specific ungovernable energy, barely contained. Who Are You came out August 18, 1978. Keith Moon died September 7, 1978. And the phrase on the back of the chair where he sat for his last album cover was not a prophecy. It was not even intended to be resonant. The photographer just liked how it looked. But that image, that specific image, is now one of the most unbearable things in rock and roll photography. This force of nature, this explosive and ridiculous and genuinely one-of-a-kind human being sitting quietly in a chair that says he cannot be taken away. And 3 weeks later, he was. Number 3. Lynyrd Skynyrd, Street Survivors, 1977. Released October 17, 1977. The original album cover showed the band standing in a ring of fire. Steve Gaines, their newest guitarist, the one everyone in the band was most excited about,
I just want to be left alone.
The one Ronnie Van Zant believed could take them to a completely different level, was nearly consumed by the flames in the photo. On October 20th, 1977, 3 days after the album came out, their chartered plane ran out of fuel over Mississippi and crashed into the trees. Ronnie Van Zant was killed. Steve Gaines was killed. Steve's older sister Cassie, who was singing backup on the tour, was killed. The pilot and co-pilot were killed. The album cover was immediately pulled by the record label and replaced with a plain black background. 3 days. Hold that number. And here is the thing that will not leave me once you know it. The album contains a song called That Smell. Ronnie Van Zant wrote it about a bandmate's problems with drugs and drinking. It is a song about death closing in, about something catching up with someone who is not paying attention. He did not write it about himself. He did not write it about the plane. He had no reason to. But the night before the band boarded the flight, Van Zant reportedly told Cassie Gaines, who had been afraid of the aircraft, who had already looked into finding her own way to the next show, something along the lines of, "If your time is up, your time is up." She got on the plane.
Oh, where I'm going.
Street Survivors charted at number 5 after the crash. It went double platinum. The band that was already breaking through became mythic overnight, in the worst possible way. The album they thought was finally going to make them as big as they deserved to be did exactly that. It just did it 3 days too late. Number 2. John Lennon, Double Fantasy, 1980. I want to be careful with this one, because I know how much Lennon means to the people who watch this channel, including me. So I want to start with something that is often buried under the weight of what happened. Double Fantasy is a happy record. I mean that without any qualification. It is a record made by someone who stepped away from being the most famous musician in the world for 5 years to raise his son and bake bread and sail and just be a person. And who came back because he had something to say about that, about domesticity, about what it felt like to choose that. The music is warm and unguarded and almost domestic, in a way that baffled critics when it came out. Initial reviews were not kind. Some were genuinely vicious. But Lennon was not bothered. A friend who saw him just before his death said Lennon made a joke about it. Something about going right down the middle of the road to the bank. He was laughing. He had a second album almost done. He was planning a world tour for 1981. He was 40 years old and more settled in himself than he had been in years. Double Fantasy came out November 17, 1980. John Lennon was shot and killed outside his apartment building on December 8, 1980. He was 40. He had been in the studio that afternoon. 21 days. And here is what I come back to on this one every time. The man who killed him had asked Lennon for an autograph that very morning. Lennon had signed it. And then he came home from the studio in the evening, and that same man was still there, waiting. And that was the end of it. The album that had been receiving mixed reviews rose to number 1 after his death. It won the Grammy for Album of the Year in 1982. Yoko Ono accepted the award. He was not there. There is a line in Beautiful Boy, the song Lennon wrote for his son Sean, where he sings good night to his boy and promises to see him in the morning. He wrote that as a father going to bed. He did not know it was going to become one of the most famous things he ever said. He was just saying good night to his kid.
Tell me.
Number 1. Queen, Made in Heaven, 1995. Freddie Mercury did not set out to make his eulogy. He set out to make music. That is the thing. That is the whole thing. Freddie Mercury was diagnosed with HIV in 1987. He told almost no one. He kept performing. He kept recording. He never toured again after that. But he kept working. And in early 1991, knowing what he knew, he told the remaining members of Queen his instructions. Come in whenever I can manage it. An hour, 2 hours, whatever I have. Write me anything, and I will sing it. And when I am gone, you can finish it off. He had no fear, in his words. He just wanted to keep going. Brian May later described what those sessions were like. The phone would ring. Freddie would say he could come in. They would drop everything and get in there. They made as much use of those hours as they could. The songs that came out of it, the ones Freddie laid down in those sessions, are called things like Heaven for Everyone and A Winter's Tale and Too Much Love Will Kill You. A Winter's Tale is a song about sitting by a lake in autumn, watching the light change. It is simple and lovely, and there is not a single word in it about dying. He was describing what he could see from where he was. He was doing what he always did. The last song Freddie Mercury ever recorded was called Mother Love. He and Brian May wrote it together. Freddie's vocals were recorded in May 1991, and he could not finish the final verse. He went home. He was too ill to come back. Brian May sang it. On November 24, 1991, the day after publicly confirming his diagnosis, Freddie Mercury died of AIDS-related complications. He was 45. Made in Heaven came out 4 years later, on November 6, 1995. It debuted at number 1 in the UK. The album sleeve reads, "Dedicated to the immortal spirit of Freddie Mercury." And there is a hidden final track that lasts nearly 23 minutes. Ambient, drifting, barely there. That sounds like what you might imagine comes after. One of the engineers who was in the room for those final recording sessions was asked later what it was like. He said it was not sad. He said Freddie was one of the funniest people he had ever encountered, that he was laughing most of the time. This is the album I mentioned back at entry 9, the one where someone in the booth already knew. And here is what I keep coming back to. What makes this the one I think about most? All the others on this list are heartbreaking because of the distance, the 3 days, the 21 days, the accidental nature of it. But Made in Heaven is heartbreaking because there is no accident in it at all. Freddie Mercury looked at what was coming, and he chose music anyway. He chose joy. He chose to leave as much of himself as he could in the place where he was always most himself. And somehow that specifically is the most devastating thing on this entire list. Not the not knowing, the knowing, and pressing record anyway.